The fog hung low over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as Alexis Ward stepped into the narrow hallway of the candidate berthing with her sea bag over one shoulder. She carried the temporary housing orders on her phone and moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to early mornings and long days. The space felt tighter than she expected, the kind of room built for turnover and training rather than comfort. 4 candidates in Navy PT gear looked up as she entered, their eyes narrowing as if she had walked into a place she did not belong. Tyler Briggs moved first, planting himself directly in her path while the others shifted behind him to close off the exit. His expression carried that mix of ego and boredom that sometimes shows up in young sailors who think they have something to prove. Alexis kept her voice calm as she explained she was assigned temporary berthing, but the words barely landed before Briggs leaned closer. Wrong place came out of him like a challenge, low and dismissive, and the room seemed to shrink around the sound. Alexis tried to angle toward the door, hoping the moment would pass if she did not feed it. The candidates stood firm, bodies squared, their silence thick enough to tell her this was not going to be quick or easy. Briggs's hand shot out before she could step away, grabbing her shoulder and shoving her back into the wall hard enough to make the concrete vibrate. Her vision jolted as the impact settled through her, and for a brief second the only thing she could hear was the tight rush of her own breathing as the imbalance of power turned into something far more dangerous. Alexis Ward grew up in a small Wyoming town where the wind never seemed to stop moving across the plains. And discipline was something learned long before sunrise. Her father had served as a Navy corpsman in Vietnam, and he carried himself with the calm focus of someone who had seen enough to understand the value of preparation. He taught her simple self-defense when she was still in grade school. Not because he expected danger, but because he believed every person should know how to protect their own space. Those early lessons settled into her like muscle memory, shaping the way she moved through the world. By the time she reached her early teens, she had fallen in love with Brazilian jiu-jitsu at a small gym in town, drawn to the idea that technique could beat strength when used with patience. She spent her weekends at local tournaments, learning how to keep her breathing steady when everything else around her felt like chaos. Her coaches noticed how she listened closely and practiced long after the mats were empty, driven by something quieter and steadier than simple competition. Every year she built another layer of resilience that never showed on her face, but stayed in her posture and her choices. When she turned 18, she enlisted in the Navy and moved into the Naval Special Warfare Support Track, where she learned the rhythms and expectations of a community built on high standards. She was never a SEAL and never a CQC graduate, and she made sure people understood that her place was different but still demanding in its own right. Her performance in training opened doors that usually stayed shut, and she was selected for a position that required both trust and technical mastery. She trained relentlessly until she earned the role of Close Quarters Combat Instructor, authorized to teach SEAL candidates and active duty operators the essentials of joint locks, defensive tactics, and weapons retention. Her success never changed the way she carried herself because she viewed the work as a privilege rather than a spotlight. She did not raise her voice and did not need to, choosing instead to rely on clear instruction and calm repetition that brought out the best in the people she taught. Years of hard training created a strength that did not announce itself, and that quiet confidence often led others to underestimate her before they understood what she could do. Her story was not about proving anything to anyone, but about showing up every day ready to work. And that steady resilience became the foundation for everything that happened next. Alexis stepped farther into the candidate berthing, and the air in the room seemed to harden the moment the 4 candidates focused on her. Tyler Briggs pushed off his bunk with the sharp confidence of a petty officer 3rd class who believed he could size up anyone in seconds, and he moved toward her with his shoulders squared. Jacob Hale rose just behind him, arms crossed and jaw set, while Logan Meyer shifted his weight in a way that made the narrow space feel even smaller. Mason Reed stayed near the back, his hands half lifted as if unsure whether he should get involved or get out of the way. Alexis kept her voice level as she explained she had temporary housing orders and held out her phone for them to see. But the gesture did nothing to calm the room. Briggs barely glanced at the screen before dismissing it with a shake of his head. The kind of reaction that came from someone more interested in control than information. Hale moved a little closer, tightening the circle around her, and Meyer planted himself near the door like he intended to block any attempt to leave. The berthing was never meant for long conversations, and the close walls made every breath feel louder and more noticeable. Reed looked like he wanted to speak up, but one sharp stare from Briggs shut him down before the words formed. Alexis stood her ground without raising her voice, refusing to let the tension shift her posture or her tone. The imbalance in the room kept growing as the candidates leaned into their assumptions and their pride, convinced she had no authority there. With each second, the misunderstanding dug in deeper, turning a simple housing error into something much heavier. And the claustrophobic pressure made it clear that the moment was sliding toward a confrontation none of them understood. Alexis let a long breath settle in her chest as she reached down for her sea bag, reminding herself of her father's steady voice, telling her that the best fight is the one you walk away from. The room stayed tight around her as she lifted the bag and turned toward the door, hoping that leaving would loosen the tension enough for everyone to rethink their posture. The candidates watched her with a mix of confusion and irritation, unable to read her calm as anything other than weakness. Each step toward the exit felt heavier as the silence stretched and the pressure in the berthing deepened. She had almost reached the doorway when Briggs closed the distance in a burst of movement that broke through the stillness like a snapped rope. His hand clamped down on her shoulder, fingers digging in as he spun her around before she could react. The wall hit her back hard, and his other hand locked around her throat in a grip that crossed from reckless attitude into a serious violation of discipline. Behind him, the faint sound of laughter came from Hale and Meyer. Laughter that showed they did not understand the gravity of what was happening. Alexis kept her focus sharp, fighting the instinct to lash out too soon while her lungs pushed against the tightening hold. The pressure against her neck, the shock of the wall, and the heat of Briggs's anger marked the exact moment the situation crossed a line that could not be undone. Reed stood frozen near the racks, his face pale as he realized the others had gone too far. The room held its breath as the shift from restraint to danger became unmistakable, and Alexis understood that the choice Briggs made had pushed all of them into a point of no return. Briggs's grip tightened for a moment, but Alexis had already made the mental shift from restraint to controlled action. She slid one hand up between his forearm and her neck, creating a small pocket of space, then rotated his wrist sharply with the kind of precision that comes from thousands of repetitions on the mats. His fingers loosened as pain shot through the joint, giving her the angle she needed to drive her palm upward into the soft tissue below his jaw. The strike was not meant to injure long term, only to stun him enough to break his balance and make room for her next movement. As Briggs bent forward in reflex, she brought her knee up into his solar plexus with a focused burst of power that forced the air from his lungs. His body folded as he dropped to the floor, gasping in short, shocked bursts that made him unable to stand. Alexis never looked down at him because she knew the next threat was already moving, and she shifted her weight just as Logan Meyer lunged with a burst of speed that came more from adrenaline than training. His size gave him momentum, but momentum was something she could use. She pivoted at an angle that kept her feet grounded, hooking her leg inside his as he closed the distance. His forward drive carried him across the point of balance she had chosen for him, and her shoulder hit his chest with a clean, directed push that sent him crashing backward. The impact rang through the berthing floor in a way that silenced the remaining laughter, and Meyer lay there stunned, his eyes unfocused as he tried to make sense of how quickly he had lost control. Alexis kept moving, knowing hesitation could shift the advantage back to them. Jacob Hale hesitated in the middle of the room, his weight shifting forward and back as if he could not decide whether to run or strike. Alexis stepped into his hesitation before it turned into action, catching his wrist and guiding it into a standing arm bar that bent his elbow and shoulder into a controlled angle. His body dropped to one knee as the pressure built, not enough to injure, but enough to show him that one wrong move would make the pain sharper. He gasped out a plea, and she released him the moment she felt him stop resisting. Mason Reed had backed against the racks with both hands raised, his eyes wide and fixed on everything except her. Alexis noted his posture and turned away, recognizing he had chosen not to fight even when the others pushed him toward it. The room settled into a heavy quiet as the three who had rushed her lay stunned or kneeling on the ground. Every movement she had made came from training, leverage, and calm intention, not from anger. The fight had lasted only seconds. But in those seconds, she had shown them exactly why control mattered more than strength and why real skill always held its own in a tight space. Senior Chief Daniel Ruiz stepped into the berthing with the sharp awareness of someone who had spent years walking into situations that did not feel right. His eyes moved across the room in a quick sweep that registered 3 candidates on the floor. One frozen by the racks, and Alexis Ward standing with her, breathing controlled, but her posture marked by recent impact. The shift in the air was immediate as every candidate stiffened under his presence. Ruiz had the kind of authority that filled small spaces and left no room for excuses. He moved toward Alexis first because that was the protocol, asking her to identify herself and explain what happened. Alexis kept her voice steady as she gave her name, rank, and assignment, then handed him her phone with the temporary housing orders open on the screen. Ruiz read each line with a clenched jaw, his expression darkening as the full picture settled in. The controlled anger in his eyes grew sharper when he looked back at the candidates who were now avoiding his stare. Ruiz addressed the candidates with a tone that carried the weight of every regulation they had ignored and every line they had crossed. He understood immediately that they had assaulted a petty officer, disregarded proper chain of command, and violated both Article 128 for assault and Article 91 for insubordinate conduct. His voice stayed calm, but there was a cold finality in it that made the room feel smaller than before. The candidates began to understand the seriousness of their decisions as the silence thickened. Ruiz reached for his radio with practiced efficiency and called for support from the Master-at-Arms, requesting security and medical personnel to report to the berthing. The clipped, professional language left no doubt about the severity of the situation or the consequences that would follow. He ordered the candidates to remain exactly where they were until security arrived, his tone allowing no argument. When he turned back to Alexis, it was with a steadier voice as he asked if she needed medical attention and assured her that the situation was now under control. The days that followed moved with the firm rhythm of Navy procedure, and the disciplinary process unfolded in a way that left no doubt about the seriousness of the incident. Tyler Briggs and Logan Meyer stood before Captain's mast with none of the bravado they had shown in the berthing, their shoulders tight and their voices low as the commanding officer read the findings. Both were reduced in rate to E3, given 45 days of restriction, 45 days of extra duty, and reassigned to a fleet support command where the work was steady and far from the prestige of special warfare training. The consequences reflected exactly what happens when a sailor crosses the line from poor judgment into direct assault on a petty officer. Jacob Hale faced non-judicial punishment for his part in the confrontation. Since he had not initiated the assault but had still contributed to the hostile environment, his punishment included formal counseling and mandatory professional conduct training designed to address the kind of behavior that undermines safety and discipline. Hale accepted the ruling with a shaken calm, clearly aware that he had stood in the wrong place at the wrong time and chosen the wrong reaction. The weight of the decision settled on him in a way that showed he understood how close he had come to harsher consequences. Mason Reed was treated differently because he had not joined the attack, but his failure to act was still considered a lapse in judgment. He was required to provide a written statement detailing the sequence of events and to complete leadership training focused on intervention and ethical responsibility. Reed approached the process with a quiet sincerity, knowing that staying silent had cost him more than he expected. The discipline across all 4 candidates reflected a system built on accountability, and the shift from arrogance to regret showed how quickly military justice can correct the path when someone chooses the wrong direction. Alexis settled into her permanent instructor quarters on the far side of the base, a quieter area reserved for staff who spent long days shaping the next wave of special warfare candidates. The move felt like a return to routine, and she welcomed the familiar rhythm of early mornings and long sessions on the mats. The space was simple and functional, just like most instructor housing. But it gave her room to breathe after the tension of the temporary berthing. She unpacked her gear with the same calm focus she brought to every part of her job. By the end of the week, the story of what happened in the berthing had spread through the Naval Special Warfare Training Detachment with the speed of something too unexpected to ignore. Some candidates brushed it off at first, convinced it had grown into a rumor that made the details bigger than the truth. Their skepticism faded once they learned she was a certified Close Quarters Combat Instructor who trained SEAL candidates and active duty operators in techniques that demanded precision and discipline. The shift in attitude was quiet but noticeable, as students began to approach her classes with a new level of respect. Alexis never brought up the incident, choosing instead to focus on instruction and keeping the training room centered on skill rather than stories. Her demonstrations remained patient and clear, and she moved among the students with the calm confidence of someone who let her work speak for her. A few candidates approached her after class to ask if the rumors were true, and she offered a simple confirmation before guiding them back to their drills. Her focus stayed on the task in front of her rather than the attention that followed her. The respect she earned did not come from retelling the moment in the berthing, but from the way she carried herself afterward. Her steady voice, grounded posture, and consistent professionalism set the tone for every room she stepped into. Real strength did not need to raise its volume, and the people around her began to understand that more clearly with each passing day. Mason Reed found Alexis outside the training building late in the afternoon, the sun dropping low enough to cast long shadows across the pavement. He walked toward her with a hesitant pace, the kind that showed he had replayed the moment in the berthing more times than he could count. His face carried the strain of someone who knew he had failed to act when it mattered, and the weight of it settled on his shoulders before he even opened his mouth. Alexis paused and waited, giving him the space to speak. Reed took a slow breath and told her he was sorry, admitting he should have stepped in when the tension first started to rise. He explained that he had felt the wrongness of the situation but froze under the pressure of his peers, choosing silence when he should have chosen action. His voice cracked once as he described the shame that followed him through every training session afterward. The honesty in his words made the moment feel heavier than any punishment he had received. Alexis listened without interrupting, her expression steady and calm as she let him finish. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but firm, reminding him that real leadership begins before a situation spirals, and that doing the right thing often starts with one person willing to speak up. She told him he had another chance to decide the kind of sailor he wanted to be. The message landed with a weight that was neither harsh nor gentle, but something in between. Reed nodded with a clearer sense of responsibility settling into him, and he walked away with a posture more grounded than when he arrived. Alexis watched him go for a moment before turning back toward the building, ready to return to her duties with the same calm professionalism that shaped every part of her work. The story of what happened in the berthing settled into the Naval Special Warfare Training Detachment, like a quiet reminder of how quickly judgment can cloud respect. Sailors across the command heard pieces of the incident, and many of them paused long enough to consider how easily they might have made the same assumptions. Alexis Ward never asked for attention, yet the events revealed something important about humility and discipline in a community built on trust. Her calm restraint before the fight and her precision after it showed a kind of strength that rarely announces itself. People began to speak about the danger of looking at someone and believing they understood their worth in a single glance. The lesson was not only that she was skilled, but that anyone could be carrying years of experience behind a steady voice and a quiet posture. Respect earned over time deserves recognition, even when it comes from someone who does not match the stereotypes people expect. The candidates who witnessed the event firsthand carried that reminder into every training day that followed. Leadership became another theme that surfaced as instructors, and students reflected on the moment things spiraled. True professionalism rests on knowing when to walk away and when to act with conviction. And Alexis showed both sides with clarity. Her restraint kept the situation from becoming worse until she no longer had a choice, and her discipline afterward demonstrated the integrity expected in their line of work. The incident became a case study in how decisions made in seconds can speak louder than anything said out loud. Across the command, the message grew into something larger than one confrontation. Every person has a story, a skill set, and a level of experience that deserves respect. Especially in a place where teamwork defines success, real strength often moves quietly, and the people who lead with integrity are the ones who anchor the rest. As the story settled into memory, it invited everyone to think about the small choices they make in tense moments, and how those choices shape what happens next.